Story 1: The House Haunted by Herby. Derry, Maine, wasn't the kind of place you moved to for the scenery. It was a gray smear of a town, all sagging rooftops and potholed streets. The kind of place where the wind carried a faint moan off the Penobscot River, like it was mourning something long gone. Jack Anderson didn't care about that. He dragged his family here in a beat-up Ford pickup, its engine hacking black smoke like a chain smoker's cough, because the paper mill was hiring and the textile plant back in Augusta had spit him out like a bad seed. His beard was thick, graying at the edges, hiding a jaw clenched tight from too many years of too little luck. Clara, his wife, sat shotgun, skinny as a scarecrow, with a cigarette perpetually pinched between her fingers, her eyes darting like she was waiting for the next shoe to drop. In the back, their 3 kids jostled. Tommy, 17, all sullen eyes and heavy metal t-shirts. Emma, 16, sharp-tongued and restless. And Sophie, 8, clutching a ratty stuffed bunny like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. The house at 142 Maple Street was a steal, and Jack knew it the second he saw it. 2 stories of weathered clapboard, a porch that sagged like an old man's shoulders, windows staring blank and hollow under a sky the color of dishwater. The realtor, Hal something or other, had a nervous tic and armpit stains that bloomed like dark flowers. He'd mumbled about previous tenants and quick sales, handed over the keys with a handshake that felt like a plea, then peeled out of the driveway in his dented Buick, faster than you'd expect. Jack didn't ask why it was so cheap. He couldn't afford to. Clara sniffed the air, damp, musty, like wet earth, and said, "It's got character." Jack muttered about drafts and hauled their boxes inside. The kids just wanted beds and a TV that didn't flicker. They'd been there 3 days when the first weird thing happened. Tommy was sprawled on the living room couch, headphones blasting Metallica loud enough to rattle his skull, when the old Zenith TV, a hulking beast with rabbit ears and a cracked knob, screamed to life. Static roared out of it, a jagged wall of white noise that hit like a punch. Sophie, coloring on the floor, yelped and dropped her bunny, hands flying to her ears. Jack stomped in from the kitchen where he'd been nursing a beer and yanked the plug from the wall with a curse. "Damn thing shot," he growled, giving the stand a kick that sent dust swirling. Tommy shrugged, turned his music back up, but Clara frowned, staring at the unplugged cord like it was a snake that might bite. The next morning, Jack found the plug back in the socket, the TV humming faintly, screen dark but alive. He didn't say anything, just unplugged it again and went to work. Then there were the keys. Clara kept hers on a hook by the kitchen door. 3 brass ones for the house locks, a silver one for the truck, all dangling on a ring with a faded plastic shamrock. Thursday night, she reached for them to run to the Piggly Wiggly. Sophie was whining for milk, and the hook was empty. "God damn it," she hissed, digging through drawers, flipping cushions, smoke curling from the cigarette she'd forgotten in her mouth. Jack hollered from the garage, "Check your purse, woman." But she swore she'd left them there. 2 days later, Sophie toddled in, Bunny under one arm, and held them up, shiny, lined up neat as pins under the couch. "Found 'em," she chirped, and Clara's laugh was tight, forced. Tommy smirked. "Maybe we've got a ghost maid." But his eyes flicked to the hallway, where the shadows seemed to lean in a little too close. Emma noticed the footsteps first. She'd claimed the attic room, cramped, with slanted ceilings and a single window that rattled like it was trying to escape. She liked it up there, away from Tommy's brooding and Sophie's chatter, a space to scrawl her angry poetry in peace. But around midnight, when the house sank into that thick, heavy quiet, she'd hear it, slow, deliberate steps pacing the upstairs hall. Thump, thump, thump. Not Jack's lumbering boots or Clara's slippered shuffle, just a steady rhythm, like someone walking with nowhere to go. She'd crack her door, heart thudding, and peek out. Nothing but the faint glow of Sophie's nightlight, a yellow smear against the dark. Old houses creak, she told herself, but the bat under her pillow felt colder each night, its weight a small comfort against the unknown. Sophie started talking about the big man a week in. She'd sit at the kitchen table, legs swinging, Bunny tucked under her chin, and drop little bombs like, "The big man moved my crayons last night," or "He watched me play in the yard today." Clara chuckled. Kids and their games. But Jack felt a prickle down his neck. He'd caught Sophie staring at the basement door once, eyes wide, whispering to the air. "Who you talking to, kiddo?" he'd asked, crouching low. "Herby," she'd said, then skipped off to chase a butterfly. That name stuck in his head like a splinter, sharp and nagging, though he couldn't place why. Clara brushed it off, lit another cigarette, but Jack started watching the shadows a little closer, wondering what else his little girl might see. The basement door was next. It was a heavy slab of oak, warped from years of damp, with a rusted knob that stuck. Every night, Jack locked it, habit from years in rougher towns, but by morning, it'd be ajar, just an inch, letting out a whiff of cold, earthy rot. He'd slam it shut, mutter about the kids messing with it, but Tommy swore he hadn't been near it, and Emma just rolled her eyes. One night, Clara woke to a creak, slow, deliberate, and saw it swing open in the dark, a black mouth yawning wide. She froze, breath caught, watching a shadow flicker past the kitchen window, tall, broad, gone in a blink. She checked outside, barefoot on the frost-crusted grass, but the yard was empty under a sliver of moon. "Must have been a dream," she told Jack, but her hands shook, lighting her neck's smoke. By the 10th day, the house felt alive. Not in a warm way, but like it was breathing, watching. Tommy's guitar twanged in the night, low, mournful notes he didn't play, waking him in a cold sweat. Sophie giggled in her sleep, mumbling, "Herby says hi." Her bunny clutched tight, and Jack, he started feeling eyes on him, a weight in the air, like someone standing just out of sight. He didn't say it out loud, not yet, but he knew whatever was here, it wasn't leaving, and maybe, just maybe, it had been waiting for them all along. The Andersons had been at 142 Maple Street for 2 weeks when Tommy decided to poke around the attic. He'd been itching for a hideout, somewhere to stash his weed and escape Clara's nagging about his grades. So he hauled himself up the rickety pull-down stairs, flashlight bouncing off cobwebs thick as cotton candy. The air up there was stale, heavy with dust and something sour, like old sweat. He kicked through piles of junk, broken lamps, a cracked mirror, until his boot hit something solid, a rusted tin box, lid scratched with H. Grayson. Inside were photos, brittle and yellowed. A broad man in overalls, face hard as granite, holding a hammer in front of the house when its paint was still white. A clipping from the Dairy News, 1957, said Herbert Grayson, handyman, keeled over in the basement at 42. Heart attack, no kin, just a quiet grave. Tommy lugged the box downstairs, dropped it on the kitchen table, and the room went still, like the air was holding its breath. "Herby," Sophie piped up, pointing at the photo with a grubby finger. "That's him." Clara's cigarette fell from her lips, ash scattering on the linoleum. Jack stared, feeling those attic footsteps Emma kept hearing slot into place like puzzle pieces. "He's still here," he said, voice rough as sandpaper, and nobody laughed it off this time. The TV flickered in the living room, unplugged again, static hissing soft and smug. Tommy swore under his breath. Emma gripped her coffee mug too tight, and Sophie just smiled, like she'd known all along. After that, Herby got bolder. The basement door didn't just creak open now. It swung wide some nights, hinges groaning like a wounded animal, spilling that damp rot smell into the house. Clara caught glimpses, shadows moving where they shouldn't, tall and hulking, darting past windows or lingering in the hall's dark corners. One midnight, she woke to a tapping, slow, rhythmic, on the kitchen wall, like someone knocking from the other side. She crept down, barefoot, and found a hammer, one of Jack's, from the garage, stuck in the plaster, handle quivering. She yanked it free, heart hammering, and locked it in a drawer. But the next morning, it was back on the counter, gleaming like it had been polished, Tommy's guitar started playing itself. Low, mournful twangs that dragged him out of sleep, strings vibrating under invisible fingers. He'd stumble downstairs, wild-eyed, and find the living room empty, the TV glowing with snow despite its severed cord. Sophie's giggles turned eerie. She'd mutter in her dreams, "Herby's mad," or "He's watching." Her bunny clutched so tight its stuffing peeked through seams. Jack felt it most, though, a presence, heavy and close, like someone standing right behind him, breath on his neck. He'd spin around, see nothing, but the air would thicken, pressing down until he could barely swallow. He had to know. One night, after Clara and the kids were asleep, Jack grabbed his flashlight and a hammer, not the one from the kitchen, a different one, heavier, and descended into the basement. The stairs creaked, cold seeping through his socks, and the single bulb flickered like a dying firefly. The space was a mess, cracked concrete, rusted tools, a workbench coated in grime. He set the hammer down, cleared his throat, and said, "Herby, you hear? Show me." The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then a scrape, slow and deliberate. The hammer slid across the bench, stopping at the edge with a dull thunk. Jack's breath caught, a chill clawing up his spine. He bolted, locked the door, and swore he'd never go down there alone again. But Herby wasn't done. 3 months in, Rick showed up, Emma's ex, a wiry punk with mean eyes and a rap sheet longer than his temper. He'd bruised her arm once, left marks she hid under hoodies, and she dumped him hard. Now, drunk and raging, he rolled up in his battered Camaro, headlights slicing through the fog. "Emma, you bitch, get out here," he bellowed, pounding the back door with fists like hammers. Jack was at the mill, Clara at bingo. Tommy passed out on the couch. Emma peeked through the blinds, stomach twisting, and hissed at Sophie to hide upstairs. The pounding echoed, relentless, then stopped, sharp as a snapped string. A scream ripped out, high, raw, cut off fast. Emma ran to the window, Tommy stumbling behind. Rick was sprawled on the porch, face down, arms flung wide, like he'd been tossed by a giant. The Camaro's engine growled, lights glaring, but he didn't move. They dragged him to the grass, his shirt torn, red welts blooming on his throat, thick, finger-shaped, like something had squeezed hard. He came to, gasping, babbling about a big guy who'd grabbed him, voice deep as a well, growling, "Leave her be." His eyes were wild, pupils blown, and he scrambled to his car, peeling out so fast the tires smoked. Emma watched him go, knees weak, a strange relief mixing with her fear. Morning came gray and cold. Sophie skipped into the kitchen, bunny swinging, and said, Herby didn't like that man. He told me. Claire's coffee mug shattered on the floor, brown liquid pooling like blood. Jack nodded, slow, a grim understanding settling in. They started leaving offerings after that. A spare key on the mantel, a beer on the counter some nights. The footsteps still paced, the basement door still yawned, but the terror faded. Herby wasn't just a ghost. He was theirs, a hulking shadow with a hammer and a purpose, guarding them against the dark. Weeks later, Emma woke to a weight on her chest, heavy and still. She opened her eyes, nothing but black, and whispered, "Herby?" The pressure lifted, soft as a sigh. Downstairs, the TV flickered on, static humming low, and she smiled into the dark. He was family now, a silent sentinel in a house that breathed with him, in Derry, where the shadows had teeth and the past never stayed buried. That meant more than she could say. She rolled over, bat still under her pillow, and slept deeper than she had in months. Story 2. The Redheaded Woman with the Knife. Mark Johnson didn't scare easy. He'd grown up in Castle Rock, Maine, a town where the woods pressed too close and the streets carried whispers of things best left alone. So he figured he'd seen enough to toughen his hide. At 34, he was a mechanic at Rusty's garage, hands stained black with grease, living alone in a sagging trailer off Route 117. His life was simple: work, beer, sleep, repeat. And he liked it that way. No wife, no kids, just a mutt named Rusty, who died last winter and left the place too damn quiet. Nights were his time, though. He'd drive his old Chevy pickup home under a sky thick with stars, the hum of the engine drowning out the silence he'd never admit bothered him. It was a Friday, late past midnight, when the first sign of trouble rolled up behind him. He'd clocked out after a double shift, bones aching, and was cruising the two-lane stretch of Black Hollow Road, a winding ribbon of asphalt flanked by pines that loomed like sentinels. The radio crackled with static. WBLM had cut out miles back, and he was half lost in the drone of his own thoughts when headlights flared in his rearview mirror. No big deal, he figured. Folks came and went on this road, even at odd hours. But these lights didn't blink or waver. They bore down, steady and close, hugging his bumper like a shadow that wouldn't shake loose. Mark squinted, adjusting the mirror. The car, a low, dark shape, maybe a sedan, was too near, its grille kissing his tailgate. He tapped the gas, nudging the Chevy up to 40, then 45. But the car matched him, relentless. "Asshole," he muttered, flicking his high beams on and off, a signal to back off. Nothing. The lights stayed glued, unyielding, and a prickle crawled up his neck, sharp and cold. He didn't like this. Black Hollow wasn't wide enough to pull over safe, Not with those ditches, and he wasn't about to swerve in the oncoming lane blind. Another car could come barreling down any second, and he'd seen enough wrecks at the garage to know how that ended. He sped up again, 50 now, tires humming on the cracked pavement. The car followed, smooth as oil, and that's when he caught it. A glimpse in the mirror as a street lamp's weak glow swept over it. No headlights on the other rig, just the reflection of his own taillights bouncing back, and behind the wheel, a face, pale, ghost white almost, framed by a wild tangle of red hair that spilled over the dashboard. A woman, he thought, but her mouth was wrong, stretched into a grin too wide, teeth glinting like shards of glass. Her eyes were hidden, swallowed by that mess of hair, and Mark's gut twisted. He didn't know her, didn't want to. Psycho, he growled, gripping the wheel tighter. Home was 5 miles off, a straight shot past the old quarry, but the idea of leading this nutcase there made his skin crawl. He had a buddy, Dave Perkins, who lived closer, off a dirt turn just past the bridge. Dave was a night owl, always up tinkering with his spikes, and Mark figured he could crash there, shake this tail. He floored it, the Chevy's engine roaring, and the car stuck with him, a leech on his shadow. The bridge loomed ahead, rusted steel, narrow, and he took the turn hard, tires spitting gravel as he veered into Dave's driveway. He slammed the truck into park, killed the engine, and bolted for the door, pounding with both fists. "Dave, open up, man. I need help." The porch light flicked on, and Dave, big, bearded, still in his grease-stained Carhartt, yanked the door wide. "Jesus, Mark, what's—" Mark shoved past, slamming it shut, locking the deadbolt with a shaking hand. "Some freak's tailing me," he panted, peering through the blinds. The car idled at the road's edge, engine rumbling low, headlights now on, 2 yellow eyes glaring through the dark. Dave grabbed his phone, dialed the sheriff, while Mark caught his breath, words tumbling out about the chase, the grin, the hair. They waited, the clock ticking slow as molasses. Mark kept his eyes on that car, expecting it to peel out or charge up the drive, but it just sat there, a predator sizing up prey. After what felt like hours, 10 minutes maybe, the engine revved once, sharp, and it rolled away, vanishing down Black Hollow like it had never been. The sheriff's deputy showed up too late, a kid named Rollins with a notepad and a yawn. Mark couldn't give much, didn't know the make, only saw the hair and that grin, and Rollins scribbled it down, skeptical. "Probably some drunk," he said, and left. Dave offered the couch, a beer, and Mark took both, collapsing as the adrenaline drained out of him. He didn't sleep though, just stared at the ceiling, replaying that face, wondering why it felt like she'd known exactly where he'd go. The next night, driving home, he was jumpy, eyes glued to the rear view, hands sweaty on the wheel. Black Hollow was the only way back, no detours, and every flicker in the mirror made his heart lurch. Nothing came, no headlights, no red hair. A week passed like that, quiet, empty drives, and he started to relax, chalking it up to a bad night, a prank gone wrong. He was wrong, of course, but Mark Johnson didn't scare easy, and Castle Rock had a way of lulling you into thinking the worst was past. It wasn't, not by a long shot. Mark Johnson spent the week after the chase on edge, but Castle Rock had a way of smoothing over the cracks in your nerves if you let it. He'd drive home from Rusty's garage each night, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror, half expecting those headlights to flare up again on Black Hollow Road. They didn't. The pine stayed silent, the asphalt empty, and by Friday, he'd convinced himself it was a fluke, some strung-out drifter, or a punk kid with a sick sense of humor. He was bone-tired from a long shift, knuckles raw from wrestling a busted transmission, and all he wanted was a shower, a beer, and his bed. The trailer waited for him, a dented tin box crouched at the end of a gravel lane, its porch light buzzing like a trapped fly. He kicked off his boots inside, the familiar smell of motor oil and stale coffee greeting him. No Rusty to wag a tail anymore, just quiet, thick and heavy, pressing in from the dark beyond the windows. He did his routine, locked the door, cracked a Budweiser, flipped on the TV for noise. Some late-night infomercial blared about knives that could cut through tin cans, and he snorted, sipping his beer. Bed called, and he shuffled through, brushing his teeth with the lights low, the hum of the fridge a faint comfort. He plugged his phone into the charger by the nightstand, full bars, good signal, and crawled under the covers, too beat to read or think. Sleep hit fast, deep and dreamless, a mercy after days of jumping at shadows. It was 3:07 a.m. when he woke, not groggy, but sharp, like a switch flipped. Something had pulled him out of that black void, and he lay still, ears straining. Then he heard it, a tapping, faint but steady, like fingernails on glass. Tap, tap, tap. His bedroom window faced the backyard, a scrubby patch of weeds and pines, and he rolled over, slow, dreading what he'd see. The curtains were parted just enough, and there she was, the red-headed woman, her face pressed to the pane, pale as bone, hair a wild snarl spilling over her shoulders. Her eyes, Jesus, her eyes were black, bottomless pits, stark against that ghost white skin, and that grin, wider now, mouth open to show teeth sharp as razors, glinting in the moonlight. In her hand, A carving knife, long, serrated, scraped the glass with each tap, a screech that clawed at his spine. Mark's breath caught, a scream dying in his throat. He lunged out of bed, bare feet hitting the cold floor, and grabbed his phone. Dead, screen black despite the charger. No, 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 he rasped, hurling it down. The landline was in the kitchen, his only shot. He bolted, heart slamming, and locked the bedroom door behind him, a flimsy shield. The trailer's layout was tight, hall to living room to kitchen, and he darted through, shadows stretching long and wrong under the dim glow of the TV. He snatched the receiver, dialed 911, but got no tone, just a faint hiss, then breathing slow and deliberate. "Hello?" he croaked, and an ear-splitting cackle erupted, shrill, unhuman, like nails on a chalkboard. He slammed the phone down, hands shaking, and realized the other line was in the living room. Was she inside? Panic clawed at him. He locked the kitchen door, grabbed a butcher knife from the block, dull but better than nothing, and crouched low, listening. The tapping stopped, replaced by silence, so thick it buzzed. Then, footsteps, soft, bare feet, padding across the linoleum, coming from the living room. He peeked through the door crack, saw pale legs, moving slow, deliberate, toward his bedroom. Her hair trailed behind, a red stain against the dark, and that knife dangled loose in her hand, blade catching the TV's flicker. Mark slid under the kitchen table, hand over his mouth, heart a drumbeat in his ears. She was in his house, and he hadn't heard a door, a window, nothing. She stopped at the bedroom door, bare feet inches from the frame. He could see her now, tattered dress, arms thin as sticks, skin glowing sickly under the light. She tapped the knife against the wall, tap, 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 then dragged it, carving slow, deep scratches. Mark held his breath, praying she'd leave, but she turned, head cocked like she'd heard his heartbeat. The grin never faltered, those black eyes scanning the dark. She stepped back, slow, and scratched something into the wall by the door. Words he couldn't read from here. Then she was gone, footsteps fading, leaving only the hum of the TV and his ragged gasps. He waited, minutes, maybe an hour, until the silence felt safe. Knife in hand, he crept out, checked every room. Windows locked, doors secure, no sign of a break-in. The living room wall bore her mark. "I'll be back for you," carved jagged and deep, wood splinters curling like flesh. He sank to the floor, staring, the knife clattering beside him. Dawn broke gray and cold, but he didn't move, just watched the windows, waiting for that tap. She didn't come back that week, or the next. Mark got a new phone, slept with the lights on, kept the knife close. The sheriff called it vandalism, suggested a squatter, but found no tracks, no prints. Mark stopped driving Black Hollow at night, took the long way through town, eyes on the mirror. Sometimes, late, he'd hear a tap, faint, distant, or catch a flash of red in the pines. He'd freeze, knife in hand, but she never showed. Not yet. Castle Rock didn't let go of its ghosts easy, and Mark knew she was out there, grinning, waiting for the night he'd let his guard down. He didn't scare easy, but he was scared now, scared enough to know she'd keep her promise. Story 3: The Haunted Laser Tag Arena. Bangor, Maine, wasn't Derry, but it had its own shadows. Quiet ones, the kind that crept up slow and stuck to you like damp fog. Jake Riley didn't mind them much. At 19, he'd landed a gig at Laser Quest, a neon-soaked bunker off Union Street where kids and drunks blasted each other with plastic guns under black lights that made everything glow like a fever dream. He was lanky, all elbows and knees, with a mop of brown hair he kept shoving out of his eyes. The job was easy: hand out vests, mop up spilled soda, lock up after the last stragglers stumbled out. It beat flipping burgers, and he liked the chaos of it, the way the arena swallowed sound in its fog and pulsing beats. Lexi Carter started a week after him, a short, wiry girl with a pixie cut, dyed purple, and a laugh that cut through the noise like a blade. She was 18, fresh out of high school, and took the gig to save for a car, something to get her out of her mom's double wide on the edge of town. They hit it off fast, trading sarcastic jabs while they swept the vesting room or reset the scoreboards. The manager, Jonathan Pike, was an old friend of Jake's dad, mid-30s, wiry, with a grin too sharp and a love for pranks that bordered on mean. He'd send them on wild goose chases, fetch a left-handed laser pack or a glow-in-the-dark mop, and cackle when they came back empty-handed, red-faced and cursing. The first weird thing happened on a Tuesday, slow and rainy, the kind of night where the arena felt too big, too empty. Jake was in the vesting room, untangling a snarl of straps when a whiff of cigar smoke hit him, sharp, stale, like someone had just lit up. He froze, sniffed again. No one smoked in here. House rules, and Jonathan enforced it like a drill sergeant. He poked his head out, saw Lexi across the lobby, counting tokens behind the counter. "You smell that?" he called. She wrinkled her nose, shook her head. "Just your BO, Riley." He smirked, but the smell lingered, curling in his lungs, and when he turned back, it was gone, quick as it came. A week later, Lexi felt it. They were closing up, fog machine off, normal lights on. The arena a maze of obstacles, casting long, jagged shadows. She was sweeping the briefing room, where they droned the rules to bored teens, when something tugged her shirt. Not hard, just a pull, like a kid yanking for attention. She spun, broom raised, but the room was empty, the neon signs humming soft overhead. Her shirt was untucked, though, the back flapping loose when she'd sworn it was tight a second ago. "Jake!" she yelled, voice sharp. He jogged over, saw her pale face, and laughed. Caught on a nail, probably. Chill. But she didn't laugh back, and he noticed her hands trembling as she tucked the shirt in, eyes darting to the corners. Jonathan started the ghost talk after that. He'd lean on the counter, grinning like a jackal, and spin tales about Emily, a little girl who supposedly haunted the place. Blonde, pigtailed, likes to mess with the newbies, he'd say, winking, hides keys, pulls shirts. Blame her when stuff goes missing. Jake rolled his eyes. Jonathan's pranks were old news, but Lexi frowned, thinking of that tug. Then he added, Ralph, some gruff old guy who smoked cigars and hated noise. Built the place, died in it, never left, Jonathan said, voice dropping low for effect. They laughed it off, called him a bullshit artist, but the story stuck, burrowing into the quiet moments. The cigar smell came back stronger a month in. Jake was alone in the arena, wiping down obstacles, foam walls, plastic barrels, when it hit, thick and choking, burning his nose. He coughed, spun around, expecting Jonathan with a stogie and a smirk. Nothing, just the hum of the lights, the faint hiss of the air vents, then a giggle, soft, high, echoing off the walls like it was coming from everywhere. Lexi? He called, voice cracking. No answer. He grabbed his rag, hightailed it to the lobby, and found her there, headphones on, oblivious. You hear that? He asked, breathless. She pulled an earbud out, frowned. Hear what? He didn't answer, just stood there, pulse racing, the giggle still ringing in his skull. They started digging after that. Lexi hit the library on her day off, flipping through dusty Bangor Daily News archives, while Jake scrolled microfiche like a detective in a bad movie. They found it. Thompson's tobacco shop, burned down in '82, right where Laser Quest stood now. Ralph Thompson, owner, 56, and his daughter Emily, 7, trapped inside when a faulty heater sparked. The fire gutted the place, left nothing but ash and bones. Guess Jonathan wasn't full of it, Lexi muttered, showing Jake the grainy photo. Ralph, stern and broad, cigar in hand. Emily, blonde and gap-toothed, clutching a doll. They stared, a chill settling between them, and wondered what else the black lights hid. That night, closing up, Jake felt watched. The arena was silent, fog off, lights up, but the air pressed heavy, like eyes boring into his back. He swept fast faster, broom scraping loud, and swore he saw a shape, tall, hazy, by the far wall. He blinked. It was gone. Lexi called from the vesting room. "You good?" He nodded, throat tight, and didn't tell her. Not yet. In Bangor, where the past clung like smoke, he figured some things were better left in the dark. For now, Jake Riley and Lexi Carter didn't talk much about Ralph and Emily after their library dive. Not out loud, anyway. The names hung between them like cigarette smoke, thick and unspoken, curling into the edges of their shifts at Laser Quest. Bangor's neon-lit bunker felt different now, its black lights casting shadows that seemed to shift when you weren't looking. They still swept floors, reset vests, and dodged Jonathan's pranks. But there was a wariness in their steps, a tension that tightened each time the fog machine hummed or the arena went quiet. They'd found the truth in those yellowed news clippings. Ralph Thompson and his little girl burned alive in '82, but knowing didn't make it easier. It made it worse. The cigar smell became a regular haunt. Jake'd be in the vesting room, racking gear, when it'd hit, sharp, acrid, like someone was puffing right over his shoulder. He'd whip around, heart kicking, and find nothing but the glow of the neon signs, their buzz filling the empty air. Lexi started feeling the tugs more, her shirt untucked 4 times in one shift, always the back, like a kid's impatient yank. She'd curse, loud and creative, but her eyes darted, searching corners where the light didn't reach. Jonathan kept up his ghost spiel, grinning like a carny, but Jake and Lexi stopped laughing. They'd seen the photos. They knew it was a Friday, busy, chaotic, the arena packed with screaming kids and college punks, when things turned uglier. They were closing late, past midnight, the fog machine off, normal lights up, stripping the place of its glow and leaving it raw, exposed. Jake was in the arena, wiping down a barrel, when the smell slammed into him. Cigar smoke, yes, but laced with something worse, like whiskey and burnt flesh. It burned his nose, made him gag, and he dropped his rag, coughing into his sleeve. Then the lights flickered, once, twice, and went out, plunging the maze into black. "Lexi!" he yelled, voice echoing off the foam walls. No answer, just a low chuckle, rough and deep, rolling from the far end. He fumbled for his phone, flashlight beam cutting through the dark, and stumbled toward the lobby. The smell followed, thick as tar, and that chuckle grew, gravelly, mean, like a drunk sizing up a fight. He hit the vesting room, found the switch flipped off, impossible since he'd locked it on, and clicked it back. The lights buzzed alive, and he spun, expecting Jonathan's smirk. Nothing, just Lexi, jogging in from the lobby, headphones dangling. "Power go out?" she asked, breathless. He shook his head, throat tight. Someone turned it off, and I heard. He stopped, the chuckle still ringing in his ears. She didn't push, but her face went pale, and they stuck close the rest of the sweep. The next night was worse. They were alone, Jonathan outside, hauling recycling bins, and Lexi was in the vesting room, broom in hand, when the smell hit again. Cigars, booze, a stench so strong it stung her eyes. She gagged, rubbing her nose, and the light snapped off. Not a flicker, just gone. She froze, blind, the broom clattering to the floor. "Jake," she whispered, voice small. A voice answered, not his, low, raspy, right behind her. "Wait," she yelped, spun, and tripped over a vest rack, crashing hard. The air shifted, cold, heavy, and she scrambled up, bolting for the lobby, slamming into Jake as he rushed in. "What the hell?" he barked, steadying her. She was shaking, tears streaking her face. "Someone's in there," she gasped. Said, "Wait." They grabbed brooms, pathetic weapons, but better than nothing, and searched, beams bouncing off walls. The vesting room reeked, that burnt stink lingering, but it was empty. No footprints, no nothing. They finished fast, locked up, and didn't talk about it. But Jake saw the fear in her eyes, mirrored in his own. The breaking point came a week later. Another late close. The three of them, Jake, Lexi, Jonathan, doing a final sweep. The arena was dark, fog off, lights dimmed to save power. They started at the front, moving back. When the smell hit, all three caught it, cigars and rot, so thick they choked. Jonathan froze, his usual grin gone. "What the?" he started, then gasped, hands flying to his throat. He staggered, fell, thrashing like something had him pinned. "Run!" he croaked, voice strangled. Jake and Lexi bolted for the exit, a side door to the vesting room, but stopped. Jonathan wasn't with them. A laugh boomed, deep, cruel, shaking the walls, and they turned back. The arena was pitch black now, the front switch dead. They found Jonathan crawling, tears streaming, clawing toward them. "It let go," he wheezed, and they hauled him up, sprinting through the vesting room, lights out again, into the lobby. The door slammed behind them, hard enough to crack the frame, like it was glad to spit them out. They locked up, piled into Jake's truck, and peeled out. In the rear view, the building sat silent, neon signs dark, but Jake swore he saw a flicker, small, blonde, vanishing fast. At Jonathan's place, they checked his neck. Red welts, thumbprints deep under his Adam's apple, fading slow over days. He wouldn't talk much after, just muttered about a hand and "don't look." They went back to work, had to. Bills didn't wait. But things changed. The smells came and went. Giggles echoed. And once, Lexi saw her, Emily, blonde and fleeting, darting through the arena. Ralph stayed unseen, but his presence loomed, heavy and sour. They started leaving stuff: cigars on the counter, daisies by the vesting room door. The tug stopped, the smell softened, like Ralph and Emily just wanted to be remembered. Newbies got the old goose chases, fetch a phantom pack, but the warnings were real now. Don't piss off Ralph, don't scare Emily. Jake and Lexi worked their shifts, brooms ready, and got out fast when the air turned wrong. In Bangor, where the dead played their own games, they'd learned to share the space and pray the shadows stayed friendly.